We are Rogue Media Sports.
It's one thing falling in love with a house, picturing yourself moving in and calling it home, and quite another navigating the world of price negotiating, mortgage lenders, and finding the budget that works best for you. An agent who's a Realtor can make understanding that world easier. Realtors have the expertise, access to proprietary data, and tools to help you get from imagining living somewhere to actually doing it. That's the kind of help we can provide. Because that's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
It is Matt Mosley, and alongside Ed Werder. And Ed has been out at the NFL meetings, had some great visits with Jason Garrett and others, talked to a lot of owners out there. But today we gather for an emergency podcast situation on the Doomsday Podcast to discuss the latest Cowboys transaction, and it's the big one. It's what really this offseason was about. They've done some other moves, but they have now signed DeMarcus Lawrence to a long-term contract, 5 years, $105 million, $65 million of which is guaranteed. And Ed Werder, as you saw this, I mean, I was focused on my Lady Bears last night. Lady Bears headed to the championship game versus Notre Dame in the Final Four, but this thing starts swirling. And the Cowboys, and I know you had it broken down year by year. I was following your Twitter coverage a little later in the evening, about 5 hours after you were reporting it. But Ed, what did you make of what your initial thoughts on this contract, and what do you think it does for the Cowboys now moving forward, as this is an interesting group of edge rushers they now have?
Well, the Cowboys basically, Jerry and Stephen Jones put a challenge forth to DeMarcus Lawrence last year when they franchise tagged him, and basically said, if you want big money, if you want elite edge rusher money, then you need to prove yourself to us one more time, and then you'll get it. And he went out and did exactly that, although he didn't have as many sacks as he had the previous season. I think he still demonstrated that he's the best defensive player, arguably the best defensive player that they have, and is among the top handful of pressure players. And, while the Cowboys go into this offseason and it looks like, they're not very active in free agency and they don't have a first-round draft pick, the most important thing this season, the number one priority for the Cowboys front office, was getting DeMarcus Lawrence signed and not being forced to use the franchise tag on him, and getting him signed soon enough that he can go ahead and have this surgery for torn labrum that he's played with in time to be fully recovered for week one of the regular season. And the timing of this will allow that to happen. It was a big factor in getting a deal done, which we can talk about in more detail later. But, I mean, the Cowboys essentially, to me, got the best player in free agency. If the franchise tag had not been used, DeMarcus Lawrence would have been the number one player in free agency. So they prevented that from happening. Basically, they did the exact opposite of what John Gruden and the Oakland Raiders did last offseason when they wound up in a contract dispute and traded Khalil Mack. The Raiders had the worst sack total in the NFL last year, 13 sacks without Khalil Mack. Trading him to the Bears. Every other team in the league had at least 30 sacks. The
13.
Raiders had 13. So that's
he didn't fit their scheme, Ed. He didn't fit what.
Well, I think it makes the point that
Gruden wanted to do.
That's how pivotal an edge rusher can be.
Yeah.
And Lawrence isn't quite as good and isn't quite as dominant a player as Khalil Mack. He doesn't create turnovers like that, but he's a great run player. I think he rushes the passer and plays the run with equal ferocity. And with him and Robert Quinn, I think you can argue that they're substantially improved in that regard now, even though, Randy Gregory's future is uncertain and David Irving is, the franchise is finally done with David Irving, which I wonder if this provokes a moment of self-awareness for David Irving.
Oh, I wouldn't.
In terms of,
on it. Yeah.
Geez, if I could have just been more dedicated and used my athletic ability like DeMarcus Lawrence has, I could have been worthy of a payday like this.
Yeah, let me be blunt on David Irving. All right, it is the Doomsday Podcast. So happy to be back together up at Frito Nations Productions up in far, far North Dallas. And Ed, maybe even out to Allen, we might be. There's been some interesting activities out here in Allen recently. Ed, this is this is on a lot of areas. What I wrote, I don't know if you've had time to read me. And by the way, I've got a new publication that I'm writing for, PressBoxDFW.com. Okay.
The name of your employers now makes you laugh? Is that where you...
No, I was screwed it up. I was saying so. It used to be called something else, but it's PressBox.
You've had so many different ones, you can't keep them all straight anymore.
PressBoxDFW.com. Gil Lebreton helped start this thing. Guy's a legendary local columnist, and so glad to be a part of that. But I think the title or the column that was sort of about, hey, he had these guys. DeMarcus Lawrence had Jerry, and Jerry is a good negotiator, but sometimes the player has the hammer. He also had the help of several local beat writers. The beat writers were out racing to his defense on this thing. But you mentioned it early on. The labrum, the torn labrum, that's an interesting negotiating tactic. I mean, we don't see this that often where a player says, you know what, I think I'll hold off on this surgery till we get this thing done. And that has become a huge problem. This is a 3 to 4 month recovery from a torn labrum. So even now that everybody's happy and all, this still, I mean, he won't be ready in my mind for the start of training camp. I bet they kind of ease him in. I bet if he plays in the one preseason game, and that might be enough for him. But that's an interesting part. He already put up the numbers, so he had leverage in that regard. And, Ed, it helps that people like David Irving messed up. He's gone. Gregory's suspended indefinitely. And arguably, I mean, Ed, do you agree with me that this guy's the best player on the Cowboys?
Well, I said argue. I was going to say he's their best defensive player, but then I remembered sort of the evolution that we've seen with Jalen Smith and the vast potential of Leighton Vander Esch. So
I still have him over both of those guys. Just
I would say probably so, but
yeah.
but it's close. It's it's getting close. But yeah, I think because of the position he occupies, because of the unique rusher that he is, and let's put that into some kind of context. I mentioned that he plays a run in the pass with equal ability, and not every pass rusher does that. But he's recorded 25 sacks over the last 2 seasons, and until they acquired Robert Quinn in the trade with Miami,
Robert Quinn, medicine man,
the only other player they didn't have another player on the roster who had more than 9.5 sacks during that same period of time. So he had nearly 3 times as many sacks as anybody else on the roster. And given that nobody knows what might happen with Randy Gregory, whether he'll be suspended for the whole season or whether, for some reason, the Cowboys seem to believe he's going to be available for week 1.
We forgot to do our emergency podcast for his contract extension. He's suspended indefinitely. And
What
they're
a
like,
unique set of circumstances to negotiate. Talk about having leverage. I mean, have the Cowboys ever had more leverage on a player than they had on him?
I think the Gregory deal allowed them to throw a few more million into this other deal. And by the way, Ed, this just so you're kind of our salary cap guru, resident guru. I mean, you and Frito, of course, but this helps with next season's cap because the way they're doing this with the signing bonus and everything, it'll free up about $9.5 million.
And so he was going to cost $20 million on the cap as long as he was the designated franchise player, whether he was on the field or he wasn't. And so this brings this first year cap number down to about 11 million, something like that. So they're going to save about $9 million on the cap, which is important because in talking to people in the Cowboys front office about this deal and kind of who's next, They've got to do a deal with Amari Cooper because you don't give up a first-round pick for a season and a half of an elite receiver. So they've got to extend his contract and make sure that they have him. They're going to do something with Dak Prescott, even though he's contractually obligated to play this season without any kind of enhancement or extension. But they've been very vocal about the fact that they are going to extend him and they're going to give him a significant amount of money. And then Byron Jones is still in line for a contract extension, and then they've got to do something with Ezekiel Elliott. So I joked to Stephen Jones. I said, the salary cap guy who's going to put this whole economic puzzle together and keep the Cowboys under the cap and retain, all this young talent that they've acquired is going to be due a raise himself at the end of this process. So, but I think Stephen's going to come out quite well eventually.
You think so?
As far as his ownership share and all the responsibilities that have come with that. But
have you been joking with Steven since this contract happened, or was this at another time? I mean,
this was today.
Oh, good. You've been in touch with Steven. Always like it when you check in. Apparently, reports have it that a Steven and D-Law, DeMarcus Lawrence conversation may have kind of moved things along. Always kind of funny, Ed, to read how these things evolve. Yesterday morning, I believe it was Pro Football Talk, just simply, and they didn't have a long report. It said, hey, in their big headlines, what grabbed everybody's attention, Cowboys and DeMarcus Lawrence close to a deal. And then in it said, hey, the talks have started again. They're getting there kind of thing. And then a lot of folks were shooting that, it's like, no, they are not close. And then by the end of the evening, it's like, I guess they were close. $105 million. Ed, let's go back over some of these contracts.
What's going to be interesting to see is if Dak Prescott. So this is the most guaranteed money any Cowboys player has ever been.
Even more than Tony. Tony had $55 million
$10 million
guaranteed.
more than Tony Romo. And let's put this.
Now he'll get more from CBS.
$65 million guaranteed is the fourth most to any defensive player in the entire NFL, behind Khalil Mack, Aaron Donald, and Von Miller. And that seems right because, not coincidentally, his 25 sacks, which I mentioned earlier the past two seasons, that's tied for fourth in the NFL during that period of time. So there seems like an equitable solution. As far as the role that this, torn labrum had, which he played throughout last year with, obviously he was threatening to go to the limit, go to the July 15th deadline, and not have the surgery. And the Cowboys countered by, well, if you do that, then you've devalued yourself to us because we're not gonna pay big money to a guy who's not gonna be fully ready to go beginning on week 1. And so this became an interesting little leverage dance that these two engaged in. And speaking to both sides today, while Lawrence made it abundantly clear very early on in the process that he was not going to have the surgery until he had the long-term security that the Cowboys had promised him. He had said nothing in that regard until yesterday. And my understanding from the Cowboys is that definitely created sort of an artificial deadline for them to get this deal done. In other words, they couldn't go to July 15th like they did with Dez Bryant when he was the franchise player, for example, and signed him long-term moments before the deadline expired to do more than a one-year deal. So, and like I said, I think it's going to be interesting to see, is Dak Prescott going to get more than $65 million guaranteed in this upcoming deal?
Yes. That's what it kind of looks like now,
I would say so, too, based on his position.
On his position. And so it'll be somewhere around there, and we'll see where that thing goes. Now, Ed, what everybody wants to think of now is, okay, what's this rotation look like? What's the depth at the edge? We knew Lawrence was going to get done one way or the other. It wasn't going to, I never sensed he's not wired. And again, I don't know Le'Veon Bell. I would assume you've spent time with him at some point, or you've run across him or done some interview with him.
Well, the interesting thing to bring his name up, last year when the Cowboys were winning and Lawrence was having success and he was playing on the franchise tag, which Le'Veon Bell refused to do. Somebody in the Cowboys organization referred to Lawrence as the quote-unquote anti-Le'Veon Bell, that he was taking the exact opposite approach of Bell, who withheld his services to the detriment of the Steelers all year long. And ultimately got himself out of the organization, and now with the Jets. Lawrence did just the opposite. He went out and played injured and proved himself beyond any doubt as an elite player in their organization. And one more point before you go wherever you were going. Just talking to some people with the Cowboys about the significance of this, torn labrum and how much more effective will he be once he has it prepared. And I was told that it'll help with his strength primarily, but mainly it'll prevent him from getting himself into a situation where he dislocates it completely, which if he were to do that multiple times could wind up with the team putting him on IR. So now he can have the surgery.
Yeah.
He'll be a much healthier player. You would expect much better statistical involvement on it from his point of view, and that's going to be important if they're going to get Robert Quinn the sack totals that they think he's capable of. Which, according to the people I've talked to over at the Star, they think they still think the coaches still think he's an elite rusher, and everybody seems to say they believe he's capable of anywhere from 7 to 12 or so sacks in a season. So that would give them maybe the best dual threat they've had in the last 5 years.
Yeah, that comes back to the best complementary pieces they've had. I'm trying to think when Lawrence, going back to when Ware, and then
Anthony Spencer.
Anthony Spencer had his moments. They franchised him one year for
twice.
For 1 year, I know it was like 13 or 14 million, and he played maybe some snaps in the first game. So, sometimes those things help the player, sometimes they help the team. And the Cowboys, what they did with DeMarcus, Ed, I mean, you could. I think you would agree with this. I mean, they basically used that franchise tag. He made a lot of money. He handled it beautifully. He never complained at all. 17-something point whatever $1 million, and I think it was their way of saying, can he go back-to-back, double-digit sacks? Is the back going to be okay? It was their year to go, okay, are we good? Are we good being in business with this guy for a long, long time?
Because he's had some significant injuries.
And they decided that's the case. Let me run over this list of edge rushers they now have, and I want to get your take, and I'll provide mine on and what I want you to be thinking of, Ed. You go back to the days, in fact, Barry Switzer even weighed in on you recently, and sort of an interesting take I think that he had via Twitter. He was talking about you and Kalishaw and dealing with you guys in the past. But think back about some of the best pass rushers the Cowboys had, obviously with Haley coming in those old days, and Tolbert and some of those guys. They had a nice rotation there. Listen to this group. DeMarcus Lawrence, Robert Quinn, as you have mentioned, and he's put up big numbers in the past. Tyrone Slugger Crawford, the guy really good at point of attack there in Panama City Beach. Randy Gregory, suspended indefinitely. We'll see. They think they might be able to get him back sooner rather than later. Taco Charlton.
First-round pick. Very disappointing
so far, but maybe he can come back.
He was a healthy inactive for a few games last year. They were trying to get his attention, obviously.
Kerry Hyder. You saw that signing.
We didn't do an emergency podcast on that, did we?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
But Hyder is kind of an interesting guy. He's a good rotation guy. And then Dorrance Armstrong, or as Gil Brandt would say, Dorrance. Loves to say Dorrance.
From Kansas, and a guy that really impressed in training camp last year. In fact, one member of the organization, now you're going to laugh at this, compared him to Bruce Smith in terms of physique and technique. And now Bruce Smith's a Hall of Fame pass rusher and one of the great dominant players in the 80s. In fact, the Denver Broncos were willing to give up 2 draft picks to get him as a free agent, as a protected free agent. So, Lawrence is. I think Lawrence is a fantastic player. Obviously, they gave up a lot to get him. They thought he was the last blue chip rusher left in the draft the year that they made the trade with the Redskins to acquire DeMarcus Lawrence, and now they made a big investment in him. I think it sends a good message to the young players on this team that, if you develop and you excel, we will reward you long term in this organization. And I think the other big thing that they achieve with this, beyond guaranteeing that the guy we think is their best defensive player is going to be with them going forward, is they get back the franchise tag if they need it for Ezekiel Elliott.
franchise
after
tag's
next year.
back in play.
Yeah, they can use it on
Use
another
it
player
on the
now.
running back and hope that he doesn't react like Le'Veon Bell or some other folks that have been upset about it.
He's always been known to be a level-headed guy in terms of his reactions, Ezekiel Elliott.
I think so, yeah, for the most part. And he's spent time one-on-one, the Doomsday podcast. We've been pleased. And then we tried to get him last year, and he was kind of like, I think I'm done with it. When I talk to these guys, it really is Doomsday. But that will be fascinating to see kind of how he performs under that. I mean, you could put a franchise tag on Dak Prescott. But the Cowboys have no history. Let's see who they put the franchise tag on. They haven't used it a lot in the past. They did put it on Anthony Spencer a couple of times. They put it on DeMarcus Lawrence. Who else did they put it on between those two guys? I mean, it's not something they've used a lot.
Dez. They put it on Dez.
Yeah, but they ended up getting the deal done.
Yeah, but they put it on him to get a deal done.
Play
on
a
it.
season, playing on it.
Yeah,
I mean, they don't do it very
mostly
often.
used it to leverage the player into a deal.
Into a bad deal.
The last player in the franchise tag got a pretty good deal, I think. I think Dez did okay.
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah, Dez ended up with a really nice contract. By the way, news coming in the past 24 hours that do you know who will? Speaking of great, famous doomsday type pass rushers, who will announce the second round pick for the Dallas Cowboys at the draft in Nashville?
My golf buddy Tony Casillas.
If you can believe it, even bigger time than Tony Casillas.
Somebody that has more than Tony's 2 rings?
Bigger time, I'm saying as a player. I mean, and not as a person, because I love Tony as well. Ed Too Tall Jones.
Oh, I played golf with him, too.
I love Ed.
You know what you need to know about Ed Too Tall Jones as a golfer? What would you think his game is?
Oh, you're going to tell me he's got a good short game. I would think, naturally, you would think the guy
Can knock
just
it out of the park.
crushes it because he's so
Yeah,
big.
Not at all. I can outdrive Ed Too Tall Jones.
I need to see that to believe it.
Well,
but
he is fantastic on the greens. He can putt, which you would not think.
does he use an anchor? Does he anchor the
I don't
putter
remember
to his-
anything about his grip.
I mean, does he use one of those? I mean, he's 6'9".
Yeah.
Does he use the one that comes up here?
I don't remember.
Okay,
I'll
'cause you
have
can't
to-
use that on the PGA Tour anymore. But
Well,
guys
we don't really play on the tour very often. I mean, maybe Romo will.
Romo is the Nelson. He'll be right back out there. God, the Nelson's getting some bad dates. Did you see that right before the PGA Championship? That's awful. Ed, you had something in our pre-show meeting, which usually lasts about 3 or 4 minutes. I thought that was interesting though. When you pay these sorts of huge amounts to players and you keep your own, what it sort of the pressure it puts on you in other areas. Explain that to our growing fandom.
Well, obviously, there's a limited amount of money. In fact, you mentioned that I was at the NFL owners meetings, and I got up earlier than necessary, as it turned out, because I had the wrong time for the beginning of the coach's breakfast. So I was there way before the omelet chef. And Garrett was asked about the DeMarcus Lawrence situation, and he said, the goal I always have in these situations is to make it a win-win. We want you, the player, to make money. The Joneses want you to make money. But having said that, we want to be part of a team that can compete for a championship, and in doing that, you have to have discipline under the salary cap. And so the challenge becomes greater for people like Will McClay and the scouting staff in the draft and in the second and third tiers of free agency, because they're going to have so much of their cap space allocated to a handful of players. They didn't realize the benefit of having a below market contract on their starting quarterback in Dak Prescott, which was the key to the Seattle Seahawks' success with Russell Wilson and the Legion of Boom winning a Super Bowl and going to another one. The Cowboys failed. That window is going to close the minute that they sign Dak Prescott, and it sounds to me like he's kind of the next priority, that either he or Amari Cooper will get the next big deal. And so when you allocate that kind of money and that percentage of your total team cap to a handful of players, then you've got to hit it in the draft to get players whose salaries you control. And so if you're going to criticize the Cowboys for going out and spending their first-round draft pick in 2019 on Amari Cooper to get the benefit of him for half a season in 2018. Now they're going to pay, I don't know, $18 million a year on the cap for a receiver instead of had they chosen to draft one this year for that position. It would have been somebody who had a much lesser salary for the next 4 or 5 years, depending on what round you took him in. So that's going to be the challenge for the Cowboys now. A guy like Stephen Jones and what he does and how he allocates the money is going to become all the more difficult and more important if they're going to be able to put a contending team together on a regular basis, because the dynamics of how their team is put together financially are changing dramatically by the moment.
Well, I think you're right. One other challenge for the Doomsday Podcast is going to be, can we make the 58th overall pick in the draft feel like the most important pick in the draft, maybe even more important than the number 1 overall pick? And I say that
we need to bring out the Jerry Jones in us.
Yes. But Cowboys fans, it's every bit as important, more important than any of those first 57 picks. So one of the things I want to do is dig into that, Ed, as we look forward to the draft. Are you thinking about, because the first night of the draft, I kind of like to, and you've been known to do this too, show up at the Star now in Frisco. Are you thinking about going to Nashville, having some hot chicken? I think that's their big thing. Hot chicken is a big dish there, and that's a big ticket in Nashville. Do you know that? They sort of fancy themselves as like having invented that.
I just like to go to Tootsie's and listen to the country music, up-and-coming country music stars.
Tootsie's. Is that
Jake Owen played there a couple weeks ago.
I would like, could you get us into the Ryman? I'd like to go to the Ryman with you. You are a big country guy. I mean, that'd be really fun. Maybe Chesney or some of your guys could get us some, because they'll have some concerts in conjunction with this whole NFL thing.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, that's something we should think about. Should the Doomsday Podcast go on the road to cover a draft in which the Cowboys don't pick until number 58?
Is there going to be voting?
We voting.
Maybe some online voting about whether we should go or people aren't that interested.
If Frito could figure out how to put up a poll on the Facebook page.
People can just add us on Twitter or on our Facebook page.
Okay, by the way, why did you not tag me this morning when you were touting this thing? You said Matt Mosley without at Matt Mosley.
Does that bother you for some reason?
Yeah, very much so.
You're lucky your name was in it at all. Don't tell me how to do it.
I was looking for it. I was like, wait, I thought Ed said he put something.
You weren't
out.
in the picture. I put you in the text. You're very fortunate to be mentioned at all.
I think you did lead with me, which is appropriate. I will say this about anything you want to add before I say goodbye. I wanted to kind of tell folks.
I'd like to know how we're allocating our cap dollars, because I don't think I'm getting a big enough percentage.
Oh, yeah. You thought that from the start. I assure you, if this thing goes where I think it's going, we'll franchise you, and you'll be happy to be on the franchise tag. I promise you, okay?
I will say this. It's good to be in studio with you. It's been a while.
Yeah, do you like it like when I let my hair kind of get out of control like this? Because you have a nice haircut, by the way. I don't know where you did. That's not a Supercuts. No, I mean, I'd actually like Supercuts to sponsor us, so I retract that. That's a good-looking haircut. To me, I'm sensing that the handcuffs are about to come off of you. I'm sensing a Werder who's ready to kind of get back on TV, but we hope that we will be able to retain your services here at the Doomsday Podcast. And I'll say this, and Frito, I think, would be proud to hear this as well, Frito Nation Productions. And, my gosh, he's Allen, Wiley, every community really in the Collin County and other places. He's just taken over. He's sort of, and he keeps getting named like the man of the year in Allen Chamber of Commerce. I mean, the guy, it's just the strangest thing I've ever heard, but they do love him out here. I had an opportunity, and I can't say where, but one of the greatest brands in all of sports. I thought they were kind of wanting to visit with me for my writing, just having been a writer at a lot of different levels, various levels, and it turns out that they in fact love the Doomsday Podcast and love what we do in podcasting.
And they want to buy it.
Kudos, Ed. Let's do the dance.
They want to partner with us? What do they want? No, I'm asking what they want.
Could we have some foreplay?
What do they want with us?
I don't know. They brought me to the hallowed halls of this organization.
Don't say what city it's in.
To basically say, we love what you guys do.
How come they didn't bring me in to say that?
Ed, I am.
You kind of handle the business.
Yes, I
is
handle the business.
Why I'm so concerned about it.
It's for good reason. But I promise you, Ed, you will someday be taken care of. Frito, appreciate everything.
Hey, just make sure you tank me.
I will. People have accused us of tanking. This has been fun. This is an emergency podcast. DeMarcus Lawrence, now a Cowboy for 5 years. We don't know if it'll last 5 years. We do know he's going to get $65 million. And hey, this is good for NFL players because the more guaranteed money they get, the more these things start to look like not funny money and actual sort of like baseball or NBA contracts where these things are guaranteed. So that's good news for players.
Here's my final thought, not that you asked me for one. But when I was covering the Cowboys for the Dallas Morning News with our good friend Tim Kalishaw back in the early 90s, and they were building that dynasty that would win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, and the conversation with the Players Association became about what you just said, guaranteed money. It's interesting that Jerry Jones was in favor of the cap, even though he believed guaranteed money was a potential threat to ruin football. Unlike baseball and basketball, because it's such a physical sport, it's a collision sport, careers are so short, Jerry really felt like if you guaranteed players money, they might not perform to the same level once they had financial security. And despite that, obviously, Jerry became one of the people in ownership who was one of the most free spending owners. And that was because he realized that was the way to effectively, quote unquote, cheat the cap, expand the cap by guaranteeing money and prorating it over the life of contract. He could actually sign players to total deals that exceeded the cap because of the way it was constructed. But Jerry actually thought that guaranteeing money had the potential of causing players to be less motivated, less willing to put themselves at risk physically, and therefore could totally ruin the NFL.
Yeah. Well,
fortunately, they've manipulated the rules to the point that it's not nearly as physical as it was, and so it's far less dangerous, and so the players aren't taking the risk.
Still dangerous, but also it's been helpful.
I was being a little sarcastic.
Yeah,
on
exactly.
That
but
point.
As opposed to those other professional sports leagues that you mentioned, the NFL has had one of the weaker unions in all of professional sports, especially given how well and the billions of dollars that it makes. And so sometimes people, I'll see people on Twitter, like writers actually go, why do these NFL players get more? And it's just like, that's the reason Marco Rivera used to call me, and that's the reason, God rest his soul, that so many players hated Gene Upshaw because they didn't think Mean Gene looked tough, but they didn't think he went to battle as hard as he could over the years. And when Marvin Miller and the old baseball union chief and some of those guys got those things done, the Donald Fairs, the MLB now, the players have always felt we're not represented as and I don't know. You probably know DeMaurice Smith. Maybe he's. Well,
we're going to find out because this the collective bargaining agreement will soon expire, and they've already begun the process of talking about it. And at some point, to get what the players want, they're going to have to be willing to strike. And so far, they haven't been willing to do that for a very long time.
No. And if they strike, maybe the AAF can come back. Ed, I'm sorry. Oh, you're friends with Polian. I'm sorry. And I do not take delight, even though I think Polian's kind of a blowhard. I do not. That was a bad. That's a rough deal.
Bill Polian's one of the great people I know and an excellent football man.
Good. Well, not a great businessman, obviously, but
the football part of it was very good.
I like the football part of it, but it turns out, by the way, when you let people into the chicken coop. Old Tom Dundon. Tom, thank you. Rescue us. That thing shut down within about 6 weeks of Tom Dundon walking in there with all his millions. It is the Doomsday Podcast. It is Frito Nation Productions. Ed Werder, excellent stuff. Appreciate you.
Good to be here.
Working on an off day, all of us. We have a lot of off days.
Frito and I would be playing golf if the weather would permit it. So.
That's right. All right, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night.
A lot can happen between falling in love with a house online and owning it, between imagining living there and breathing in your new home for the first time. Having an advocate who can help you navigate the complex world of financing, inspections, negotiating, analyzing the market, and talking through any anxieties that may pop up, that can make all the difference. That's what the expertise of a Realtor can do for you. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors and bound by a code of ethics, because that's who we are.
Start clean with Clorox, because Clorox delivers a powerful clean every time. Because messes happen. Because...
Hey, listen. Remember how you told me to toss those takeout containers before we left for vacation? And you were like, I'm serious. If that leaks over the counter, it'll be a slimy abomination by the time I get back. And I was like, yeah, of course. Don't worry about it. I won't forget. Well...
Ooh, yeah, that happens. So start clean with Clorox. Use Clorox products as directed. Rinse after use if in contact with food surface.